Today on Me, Myself, and I, I'm going to be teaching myself how to play Melee, the combat component of the Fantasy Trip by Steve Jackson Games. So first of all, what exactly is Melee? Well, Melee is not, in fact, a role-playing game. This is the combat component to a role-playing game called The Fantasy Trip. Seen here in the Legacy Edition box, which has everything ever made for the Fantasy Trip that was completely reprinted a few years ago that Steve Jackson Games was good enough to send me. This is an amazing product. It's got all the stuff in it. It's got counters and rules and all kinds of great stuff. But today we're going to be focusing specifically on Melee, or as I pronounce it, melee. Yes, I know that's incorrect, but when I was 7 years old, I saw this word and mispronounced it melee, and it just stuck. So I'll probably say melee more often than melee, so that's just the way it is. Nonetheless, what this product is a combat system. This is basically an arena combat simulator, essentially. It's dead simple, but it is, in fact, the prototype to GURPS, which would go on to become, I think, probably far more well-known for various reasons. But the Fantasy Trip is a role-playing game that's composed of several components. One, of course, is Melee. The next is Wizard, which is the magic rules. And then we've got this little death test, which is it's kind of like a solo adventure, like a choose your own adventure. I'm going to probably put myself through this. Maybe I'll film it too. I think it might be super fun. And then, of course, we've got In the Labyrinth, which is basically the GM's guide. This is what makes these components a role-playing game. So when you put all these things together, you get the Fantasy Trip, which is a role-playing game. But today, we're going to be focusing mostly just on the combat system of Melee. It's still so weird for me to say it that way. As I said, 50 years of saying melee. That's just the way it is. Okay, so what makes this game interesting? Well, first of all, the Fantasy Trip has been around, I think, since 77. It's been around forever. It's been around for pretty much as long as AD&D has been around. It takes a very different look at combat within a role-playing game. AD&D and its predecessors were all about sort of abstracting things like hit points and armor classes and all that kind of stuff. But what this game does, it really focuses on individual tactics on a hex grid like this. In fact, these hex grids come with the game as well. So you've got sort of your little arena template here if you want it. The game is based on D6s and D6s only. You roll 3D6 under your score in order to achieve what you need to do. So there's no D20, there's no D4s, D8s, nothing like that. It's just D6s. And it is a bell curve system as opposed to a swingy single die system. I did a video on that about the various types of RPG systems, which you can find linked up here. Let's talk about characters. Well, again, this is just the combat component. So we don't get hugely into the weeds in terms of characters like with special abilities or anything like that. This is just stuff focused on how to fight. So the characters here, as you can see here, this is a character sheet. This is one version of the character sheet. There's not much to it. Characters in Melee specifically are composed basically of strength and dexterity. Strength is not only how strong you are, but also how many hit points you have. Dexterity is how easy it is for you to hit somebody else with a weapon. That's basically it. IQ comes into it only when you add in the magic rules, which we're not going to get to today. And MA is move allowance, how much you move. That is determined almost entirely by the armor you're wearing, okay? Then you've got a space for weapons, and you've got a space for shield, and then this is just a place to track how many hits you've taken. So this is dead easy. So in the interests of keeping things consistent, I'm going to create Black Jay, the warrior, and I'm going to put him up against a single orc to begin with to see how that works. So these tokens all come with the game. So I'm not going to be using miniatures. I'm not going to be using terrain or anything like this. In essence, this is the perfect featureless gray plain because, as you can see, it is utterly featureless and it's white, but you get the point. And then we're going to call this token the orc. So in order to make Black Jay, it's going to be very, very simple. Every character starts off, excuse me, need some morning Joe. Every character starts off with a score of 8 in strength and dexterity, and then you have 8 points to spend. So to keep things super simple, I'm just gonna split up those 8 points into 4 and 4, which means that strength and dexterity, 8 plus 4 is 12, is gonna be 12 in both these things. And Black Jay. IQ is gonna be 8. Again, IQ is not gonna come into this. Move allowance is gonna be based on the armor. So the next thing we do, when you make a character in this game, you just pick 2 weapons. Shield is considered a weapon. So I'm gonna go super simple. I'm gonna go broadsword, and small shield. Broadsword, you need a minimum strength of 12, which I have, and it does 2 dice of damage, so 2d. A small shield reduces things by 1 hit. In other words, if I take a hit, a shield reduces the damage by 1. A small shield gives me no dexterity penalty. That's the thing about armor and shields, is that the heavier armor and shield that you have, the more it's going to affect your movement allowance and your dexterity itself. So it's in this game, it's harder to actually hit somebody when you're wearing big, heavy armor because you're very encumbered. That's just how they do it, and you're slower. You actually move quite slower as well. I'm going to give him Chainmail. Chainmail is going to it's going to protect him for 3 hits, but it's also going to give him a movement allowance of 6. It's also going to give him a penalty of -3 to his dex. So here, I'm going to put 12/9. That just means that normally his dex is 12, but in his armor, he is now dexterity of 9. Okay, so that is Black Jay. He done. Now we're going to give us Orc. We're going to call Grumash. Grumash. And let's see, let's make him stronger. Let's give him a 13 strength, which is going to give him a 11 dexterity, IQ of 8. Let's do something interesting with Grumash here. First of all, let's give him actually a spear. Now, there's a very particular reason why I'm giving him a spear as opposed to something else. Spears and polearm weapons have slightly different mechanics in this game. They have reach, and so I want to test that. A spear is a 2-handed weapon, which means he can't use a shield with it, and it does 1d plus 1. 1d plus 1 damage. Oh, and every fighter has a dagger as well. It's just assumed you have a dagger, which does 1d minus 1 damage. Okay, so he's gonna have a shield as well. It's just gonna be slung on his back. Do I want him to have armor? I think we're gonna give him leather armor, or the equivalent, which means his movement allowance is 8, and it's minus, it stops 2 hits, and it's -2 to dex. So his dex is actually also going to be 9. Okay, so that's it. That's Grumash and Black Jay. There they are. So I'm just going to start these guys here and here. Haha. Now, facing is important in this game. You take your token. Your token always must be facing a long side of the hex as opposed to the point. That's just the way it works. And of course, if the head is facing that way, that means that's where they're facing. So if we look here, this is Black Jay. He's facing this way. That means that these 3 hexes here in front of him are his front hexes. These 2, kind of just behind him a little bit, are his side hexes. And of course, this one behind him is his rear hex. And the same goes for any figure. Facing is important because you can only attack someone in your front hexes. And if someone is in your front hex, then they are engaged with you. And as soon as they're engaged with you, they can no longer move unless they do a withdrawal action, right? So again, a lot like any other game, essentially. As soon as you're engaged with someone, you can't just freely move around. You can shift 1 hex and do something, but we'll come to that. So right now, both of these guys are not engaged, they are disengaged. So the first thing we do is we determine initiative. How we do that? Very simple, we roll a d6 for each side. So Black Jay is gonna have a 5 and Grumash is gonna have a 6. So the Orc goes first. Now when you win initiative, you can choose whether you go first or your opponents go first. So in this case, the Orc, because he's got a spear and he can throw that spear, he's going to choose to let Black Jay go first because he's going to see what he's doing. So he's basically, waiting here on this featureless gray plain, waiting for Black Jay to do something. So Black Jay's going to move first. As a disengaged figure, Black Jay has a number of options. His move rate is 6, so he's not super fast. But I think that Black Jay is going to choose to move up towards the Orc. He's going to move his full move. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, that's pretty close, but not adjacent to the Orc. So they are not engaged with each other. Now this is interesting here. The Orc can choose to move now. The Orc can move anywhere he wants. He is not engaged with Black Jay, but here's an interesting thing about the pole weapon. This spear has a reach of 2 hexes. So even though the Black Jay is not engaged with the Orc can still hit him from 2 hexes away, right through there. He can do something called a jab attack. Now he doesn't have to do that. He could do something else. He could do a charge attack. But in this case, it wouldn't make sense to do a charge attack because in order to really maximize the value of a polearm weapon, you want to charge at least 3 hexes, right? So if he was here, he could go and gish him, but he's not. He's only 2 hexes away, so there's no advantage for him to do that. But he can hit Black J from this distance with a jab attack. So I think that's what he's going to do. They're still disengaged. Now, we've done the initiative phase, but now the combat phase happens. So that's slightly different how this works. When you take your initiative, you choose to do something. Black J's was to move up to his full. If you ever move more than half of your movement allowance, you can't attack. Okay, so he can't attack. This figure here, this orc, he has opted to do technically a charge attack. Even though he's not moving up to half his movement allowance, it's still considered a charge attack. He's going to do a jab attack from here. So now we go to the combat phase, and the combat phase happens based on dexterity. So normally, their dexterities are exactly the same here. But in this case, it's not really going to matter because they're not engaged. Black J can't attack back anyway, so we're not really in the combat phase. And in any event, pole arms always strike first before non-pole arms because they've got reach. So the orc is going to do a jab attack, and there's really nothing Black J can do to defend against it. Defense is an action you can take, but you have to declare it, right? He did not declare it. He just moved. So the orc with a jab attack, it's a regular attack. So the orc sees Black J running in, and he jabs him from 2 hexes away. So he's rolling his dexterity, his adjusted dexterity, which is 9 because of his armor, 9 or less on 3d6. Okay, well, that's 9, 10, 11. So that is a miss. The orc is not able to connect with the spear. Now we would normally go into a forced retreat situation, but there is no forced retreats because nobody got hit. So now we go to the next round. Once again, we roll initiative. I'm going to get a different die color for initiative. For the orc, we'll use the black dice. Okay. Again, the orc goes first. So he decides whether he's going to go first or whether Black J is going to go first. I think the orc is going to decide to go first, okay? So his choice of action as a disengaged person, he's going to do something kind of clever anyway. He can still effectively move for an attack. I think he's gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, and just kind of spin around, and you can change facing at the end of any move action. And he's not engaging Black J yet. He's still sort of waiting for him, but he's going to jab again from this distance. So basically, he's going to come over here, and he's going to get, he would normally get the +2 to attack from the side. However, now it's Black J's turn, because we don't go into combat phase until everyone has declared their actions and moved. So Black J is going to charge and attack. So he basically changes facing, moves here, and is going to change its facing again. Changing facing doesn't cost anything. He moves basically 1 hex and engages the orc. He does a charge attack. So now we go to combat phase, and now it's based on dexterity, adjusted dexterity. The orc no longer has the advantage of attacking from the side because Black J has moved. So it's almost impossible to try and run around somebody and attack them from behind unless that person is already engaged with someone else. So with the man-to-man combat here, one-on-one, you don't have those kind of tactics available to you. But as soon as you had 2-on-1, suddenly that becomes a much bigger deal. Okay, so now we go to the combat phase. It's based on adjusted dexterities. They're both at 9. Ties are resolved each turn by a die roll. So because they're both equal dexterities, in the combat phase, we determine who goes first. And in fact, it's going to be Black J this time. So Black J moves in, charges in, and attacks. His adjusted dexterity is 9, and he's rolling 9 or less than 3d6. Does he hit the orc? 5, 6, 7, 8. That is a hit. So he successfully hits the orc. How much damage does he do? He does 2 dice damage against the orc, okay? Which means he does 7 damage against the orc. However, the orc is wearing leather armor, which takes off 2 hits. So the orc takes 5 hits. That's a big hit. 5 comes off of his 13 strength. A figure which takes 5 or more hits in one turn has its dex adjusted -2 for its next attack only. So what that means is if you take a big hit like that for your next attack, you're kind of reeling from the pain and you're slightly impaired just as you grit your teeth through it and try to stay in the fight. But you do get that -2 penalty, which is interesting. I think I would put like a bead on the orc just to remind myself that he's -2 to his next attack. He's essentially stunned briefly. Okay, so what that means is Black J is gone. He's moved in. He's won the initiative in the combat phase. He's successfully hit and done 5 points of damage to that orc. That is really bad. The orc can now respond with an attack. He does have a spear, which he can still use in an adjacent hex. So he's going to attack Black J, but now for this attack only, he's -2. So he's rolling on 7s. So because of the pain of that that strike, he's going to be harder for him to respond in kind. Oh, but look at this. He nails it. Right there, 3 and 4 is 7. It's exactly what he needed. 1d6 plus 1, and he'll do 4 damage to Black Jay, but Black Jay has Chainmail, which takes off 3 hits, and because the attack is coming from one of his front hexes, he's also able to use his small shield, which is 1 hit, so that is 4 hits. 4 hits. Minus 4 hits is 0, so Black Jay's armor and shield absorbs the damage. He takes no damage. Now we go into the force back sequence. Basically, what that means is at the end of the combat, any figure who inflicted hits with like a hand-to-hand weapon and took no hits itself may retreat that enemy 1 hex and then follow if you want. So in this particular case on the Featureless Grey Plain, there's no particular advantage for doing that, but let's do it anyway just to demonstrate how it works. So he's done damage to the orc. The orc did not do damage to him. At the end of the combat phase, now he's able to push him back 1 hex. And he doesn't have to advance either. If he, for whatever reason, if he didn't want to advance the orc, he wouldn't have to do that. Now, what's interesting about this rule is, let's say that there was, I don't know, a dead body in this hex. Although it doesn't explicitly say this in the rules, it is heavily implied that if you were forced into a hex with something like a dead body, there's the idea out there that exists in these rules that basically if that were to happen, the orc would have to make a dexterity roll on 3d6 or else fall prone. Again, it doesn't explicitly say that in here, but it's strongly implied. But anyway, so that might be a reason why you would do that. But there is no dead body there. We take off this bead because he is not at a penalty to strike anymore. That only happens right after you've been hit, which again, I quite like. There's a lot of games that have what detractors call the death spiral, so that the more damage you take, the harder it is for you to do anything. I quite like death spiral rules. They make sense to me. However, a lot of people don't like it because if you get hit really bad, it becomes really hard to get back in the fight unless you have sort of external help. This game kind of has the best of both worlds. There is a death spiral, but it only lasts for your next attack. It's assumed that after you sort of grit your teeth through the pain, you're sort of back on your feet and the adrenaline kicks in and you're ready to go again. So I quite like that marriage of the two philosophies there. Okay, so now we go back into the regular initiative phase to determine who chooses to move first. And this is going to be Black Jay. Well, Black Jay is going to act first. Now he is engaged, okay? So now he has slightly different options. So he's going to pick shift and attack, okay? Shift just means moving 1 hex as long as you remain adjacent to whatever foes you're engaged with. Well, he is going to shift and attack just because, he doesn't have to. We're on the Featureless Grey Plain. There's no point, but, just to demonstrate how that works. He shifts 1 over, keeping the orc in his front hexes, and he's going to attack. The orc now decides what he's going to do. I think the orc is also going to shift, but shift and defend, just to demonstrate how this works. So the orc is going to shift over here now and change his facing this way. They're still in each other's front hexes, but he's going to defend. What does defend mean? Well, I'll show you what it means in a second. We now go to the combat phase. We compare dexterities. They're both still at 9. So once again, we roll off. Normally that wouldn't happen. Normally the higher dexterity goes first in the combat phase. So there is an advantage for the faster foe. Let's see. Oh, well, Black Jay goes first again. So he's going to strike first again. Now, because the orc has shifted and defended, what this means is Black Jay must now roll his dexterity of 9 or less on 4d6, not 3, because the enemy is defending. Again, I quite like it. It's a nice, simple way to illustrate that the opponent is defending themselves without having the orc have to make a separate defense roll or something like this. Very, very streamlined. It's quick, it's clean, it makes sense. All right, so Black Jay's going to try and get 9 or less on 4 dice. Now, this is a little harder to do, as you can imagine. A figure which dodges or defends cannot attack, so that's the trade-off, is that the orc is making it harder for Black Jay to hit him, but he cannot strike back. All right, what do we got here? Well, that's definitely not going to do it. 6, 12, 14, and 17. It's a complete miss. So because the orc was defending, it made it much harder for Black Jay to hit. And in fact, he doesn't hit, and now it's the orc's attack, but he defended. So that's the end of the combat phase. No one gets pushed back. I do want to take this time to mention that there are critical hits and sort of fumbles in this game. So when you're rolling 3d6 to attack, if I was to roll a 3, which of course is not going to happen very often, but if I was to roll a 3, just to take us out of the combat for a second to explain a little bit of these dice mechanics. What this means is not only do you hit regardless of what your dexterity is, and you do triple damage. So that is obviously a pretty brutal one. If you were to roll a 4, It always hits regardless of dexterity, and you do double damage. And of course, if you roll a 5, then you automatically hit regardless of your dexterity, but you do normal damage. Conversely, if you were to roll a 16, that's always a miss, regardless of your dexterity. If you were to roll a 17 on the dice, you would miss, and the attacker drops his weapon in his own hex. Okay? And of course, if you roll the old 3d6s, if you roll 18, you always miss, and your weapon is broken. So there is fumbles and criticals in this game as well. Okay, so that was the end of the combat phase. Now we go back into regular initiative. So who goes first? It's going to be, well, I have to roll again because that's a tie. Wow, look at this. Steve Jackson is very clear that there's no simultaneous actions in this game. So anytime you have a tie, you have to do a roll off. Okay, so Black Jay goes first again. He's going to charge an attack, which just means shifting one hex. In this case, he's not actually moving, and striking. The orc is also going to, now when you are engaged, you can change weapons. He can drop a ready weapon, which he does. So he drops his spear and readies his shield. The game comes with these little weapon things too, which is cool. So he drops his spear and his hex. Boom. Now he can't attack or defend because he's busy changing weapons. So Black Jay is going to get the attack. And he comes in with 3d6 against 9 against this. Okay, well, look at this. That is a roll of a 4. That is a brutal attack. It's going to be double damage. This is, oh my God. Okay, oh, this is awful. So 8 double the 16 minus the orc's armor. He's got leather armor, and now he's got a shield out, which is good. That takes off 3 hits from the 16. That's 13. He doesn't have a whole lot left. That is the end of the orc. Black Jay basically hacks down the orc, and that is the end of him. Okay, so that is a basic kind of combat that shows facing and shifting and charging and stuff and how to use a polearm and stuff. I'm gonna beef it up a little bit now, and I'm gonna add in an orc archer, and I'm gonna start them much farther away, okay? So Black Jay is still the same. He's gonna start over here. This orc archer, I'm gonna give slightly different stats. I'm gonna give him 2 points of strength, so he'll be at 10, and 6 points to dexterity, which is going to make him 14. So he's going to use a small bow, which does 1d minus 1. He's not going to have any armor, I don't think, because I don't want him to have any dexterity penalties. So no armor, so his move allowance is 10. He does get a separate weapon as well. I'm going to give him a saber as well. All right, so this is the orc archer and Grumash the warrior against Black Jay. So we start again now. They're over here. So who goes first? Which side goes first? We roll, and it looks like it's going to be Black Jay. So he is going to try and close the distance as fast as possible. So he's going to move his move allowance of 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That puts him there. Now these guys decide what they're going to do. Let's do the archer first. The archer is going to, because he's disengaged and he's got a missile weapon, he's going to do a missile weapon attack. Move up to 1 hex and or drop to prone or kneeling position and fire a missile weapon. So he's going to move 1 hex backwards and shoot. Now how missile fire works in terms of ranges. Actually, before we get there, I want to declare what the other orc is doing. The other orc is going to, well, he can't charge an attack. His movement is 8. 1, 2, 3. Oh, he can. 1, 2, 3, 4. Actually, let's not do that yet. Let's hold off. Let's just have the orc wait for Black Jay and determine what happens with this archer. So the orc is going to move up to half his allowance, and that's that. Okay, so now we go to the combat phase. All attacks are carried out in order of the adjusted dexterity, which means that our orc archer with his dexterity of 14 is definitely going to go first. This is based on the number of megahexes distance. These are megahexes here. He is 2 megahexes distant. There's no dexterity adjustment, but if he was further back here, he'd be attacking at a penalty. So just like every other game, there's range penalties the farther away the target is, but there is no range penalty here on the Featureless Grey Plain. So the orc is going to fire his bow in the melee phase. He's the only one that can actually attack. 3d6 on 14. Does he hit Black Jay? That is an 11. He does, in fact. So the arrow goes sailing into Black Jay, and it's going to do its damage of 1d minus 1. 1 minus 1 minimum damage, I believe, is 1. Actually, it doesn't specifically say anywhere that weapons do a minimum of minus 1. So maybe, in fact, the arrow does nothing. 1 minus 1 is 0. It doesn't specifically say that. that it's not the case. So I think that is the case. Nonetheless, it wouldn't matter because Black Jay's got a shield in his armor on, so that arrow wouldn't have penetrated. So basically the arrow goes sailing through the air and does nothing there. That's the end of the combat phase. There's no forced retreat. So now we go back to side initiative and we see who goes first. It's going to be the orcs. So the orcs have to decide, are they going to go first or is Black Jay going to go first? The orcs decide they are going to go first. The orc archer is going to shift, or move 1 hex rather, and shoot. And this orc is going to charge. So he's going to move. Oh, he can't now because you can move up to half your movement allowance and attack. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's not going to do it. Actually, he's going to move his full movement allowance. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And change facing here. Okay. Now, before the attacks happen, Black Jay decides what he's going to do. Well, he's kind of in trouble. He's going to be shot at, and now he's got this orc who's running all the way around and trying to take him from behind. So I think Black Jay has to, now he is engaged, so he can't just move anywhere he wants. He's engaged. He's going to shift and defend. He's in big trouble. You can either dodge or defend. Dodging is just if he was out in the open and this guy was shooting him, he could declare a dodge, which would add a 4th dice to this archer's attack. But he's engaged now. He can't dodge. He can only defend against hand-to-hand because this is the guy in front of him. So I think he's still going to do it. He's going to shift and defend to try and make it harder for the orc to hit him, knowing that this arrow is going to come in. Basically, he's hoping to get initiative next round. Okay, so now we're in the combat phase. Highest dexterity goes first, which is the orc archer. He will hit with a 10. So Black Jay is hit with this small bow arrow. 1d -1, 4 -1 is 3. I would count his shield in this anyway because the arrow's basically coming from one of his front 3 hexes. Anyway, in any event, he's got 4 points of armor, so 3 damage is mitigated by that. So that's what's happened with the orc when he shoots. Now we go to dexterity roll off because they both got the same dexterity in the combat phase. Orc's going to go first. Because he moved through more hexes, he would normally get a damage bonus when he strikes Black Jay because he's charging with a polearm. However, you have to move in a straight line in order to do that. He did not move in a straight line, so he is not going to get any advantages to damage because of that. There's no positioning bonus here either because Black Jay shifted to turn to face him. So the orc is just going to roll straight up on his 9 with his spear. 5, 8, 9. So a 10 will just miss, which means now it's Black Jay's turn to... Oh, what am I doing? Now it's Black Jay's turn to act, but he declared a defense. Oh, I forgot about that. The orc should have actually rolled a 4th dice. I forgot Black Jay was defending. I'm trying to illustrate all of the rules at once, so that's the reason why I'm kind of getting tripped up a little bit. Again, like any game, when you're learning it, you're going to make all kinds of weird mistakes at the beginning. That's why I do the Featureless Grey Plain, to teach myself the flow and process of the combat so that when I actually present it to my players, I already know it cold and I can make the combat run really smoothly. So that's why you see a lot of little flubs and stuff as I'm learning these things, but that's perfectly fine. The orc would have rolled 4 dice and he would have missed anyway because he didn't roll low enough. So Black Jay does not get an attack because he was defending, which brings us back to the forced retreat phase, but no one got hit, so it doesn't apply. So we go back to initiative in the next round. Who gets to choose initiative? It's the orcs again. I think the orcs are going to let Black Jay declare first. They're going to see what he does. So Black Jay is going to declare first. Black Jay is going to shift and attack because he is engaged. He's going to shift over here. That's what he's going to do. This orc is also going to shift. Here's the thing. This orc is going to shoot. We know that. He's going to move 1 and shoot just because he can. This orc, if he was really smart, he would start to get out of the way, but you know, the orcs aren't super smart, so I'm just going to say he's going to shift and attack, but he's not actually going to shift. He's just going to change facing. So now we go to the combat phase. The arrow is going to go first. There's no range penalty here. Oh, there is a range penalty. He is now 3 hexes away, which means, oh, that's good. That was smart of Black Jay to do. So he's going to be a -1 because of the range. So now he is rolling on 13 or less, and he does with an 8. He does 1d6 -1. 4 -1 is 3. Again, Black Jay's armor is going to take that. So it's really hard to get to the armor with this little bow, as you can see. Now we go into combat phase. Now we go into roll-off phase here because these two have identical dexterities. Once again, there can be no ties. So Black Jay's going to go first. He already declared his attacks. He's going to follow through with that. He's rolling 3d6 on 9 or less against this orc. He's going to roll a 9 right on the button. So he's going to do his 2 dice damage against the orc, and that's going to be 10 minus the orc's armor, because he does have his shield, but the spear is a 2-handed weapon, so the shield's on the back. The orc's armor mitigates 2 hits, which means the orc takes 8 points of damage. Okay, for sure the orc is going to be -2 on his next attack. However, a figure which takes 8 or more hits in one turn immediately falls down, prone. So to represent that with these little counters, we do that. Boom, prone. If he is not already attacked, it may not attack that turn, and he's prone. On the next turn, it may use an option to stand up or crawl. Interesting. Okay, so, wow. That's a big hit that knocks down the orc and basically cancels his attack. Now, I'm going to keep this -2 dex because it does say that a figure which takes 5 or more hits in one turn has its dex adjusted -2 for its next attack. So whenever that attack comes, he's still going to be reeling from that pain. I think that makes sense to me. Boom, down he goes. That is the end of the combat phase. Now we do the pushback phase, but here's what's interesting. The forced retreat phase. Black Jay can retreat that enemy 1 hex, however, he's prone. So what I would say is that Black Jay can advance to the hex vacated by the enemy or stand still, but because the enemy is prone, I would call this like an edge case. So I would say that in fact, Black Jay is going to advance as though he pushed the orc back, except he's going to move this way instead. Which brings us now to the next round. Who goes first? The orcs go first. Well, the orcs are going to choose to go first. This orc is going to stand and shoot. This orc is going to take option G. He is still engaged because he's still adjacent to Black Jay. So he's going to stand up, which is rise from prone, kneeling, or knockdown at the end of the combat phase. Interesting. His whole action at the end of the combat phase is going to be getting up, which means that Black Jay now declares he's going to take his advantage. He's going to shift. He's going to change his mind a little bit. He's going to shift and attack, which means he's attacking a prone figure. He's going to be attacking at +4. There's nothing the orc can do because he's chosen to stand up. He can't defend himself, nothing. He's just trying to get to his feet. Great. Now we go to the combat phase. Highest dex goes first. So the orc's going to roll 14 or less on 3d6, which he will miss this time. Wait, no. 7 and 6 is 13. He will hit Black Jay, but is he going to do any damage? 3 minus 1 is 2. Again, the shield and the armor takes the brunt of that damage. It's really impossible for this guy. Is it impossible? It's almost impossible for this orc to damage Black Jay. He'd have to roll a 6. Amazing. Armor is really useful. So even though it slows you down and makes you a little more clumsy, it's really useful against stuff like this. He's basically a tank against this little short bow, which is kind of cool. All right, we now go to combat phase here. The orc can't do anything, so Black Jay's going to attack, but because he is attacking a prone foe, +4 to his dexterity. So he's rolling on 13 or less this time. Oh, wow. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Good thing. Good thing he got the bonus because now he's probably going to end this orc. 2 dice damage is a 7 minus the orc's armor of 2 is 5 damage to the orc, which will end him because he only had 13 hits. He's already taken 8. So, boom. Black Jay kills the orc before the orc can stand up at the end of the phase. He's technically down to 0. If it was a player character, he wouldn't be dead. He'd be unconscious at 0. You're only dead when you go under 0. Nonetheless, he's just an orc, so it doesn't matter there. That was the end of the combat phase. Okay, good. Well, boy, armor is really useful. Now we go back to initiative. This orc over here is not thinking this is a good idea anymore, but he's going to decide to go first. Well, he's going to, let's see, 1, 2, he still has a penalty. He's going to move here. It's still out of range. He moved and declared an attack. Then Black Jay is going to decide to move his full. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now this is interesting here. So before this orc can actually shoot, things have changed. The orc declared move and fire. Then Black Jay declared a full move. He can't attack because he moved more than half his movement, but he engaged the orc, which means in the combat phase now, this orc is now engaged with a missile weapon. He has something called a one last shot missile attack. If a figure had a missile weapon ready before it was engaged, which he did, it may get off one last shot. This option reflects the fact that you can almost always release an arrow at a charging enemy, which is exactly what happens. The orc gets one last shot at Black J, 14 or less. He will hit, but is he going to do any damage? Probably not. No damage. Black J's turn, but he can't attack. So that brings us back to a new round. Things have changed for the orc. He can't attack. He wins initiative again. He is going to, oh boy, he's engaged now with a bow. You can't use a bow like this. He's going to shift 1 hex. Over here, you have to remain engaged with your opponent and change weapon. So he drops his bow and readies his saber. Ha-ha, is what he's doing. Black J is just going to change facing and attack because he wants to put this orc down. He knows this orc has no armor. Now we go to the combat phase. The orc, his action was to shift and ready his saber. He's got it out. Black J can attack now. Boom, 3 dice, 9 or less. Does he hit the orc? Let's roll it again. This is looking very good. He certainly does hit the orc with the roll of a 7, 2 dice damage. The orc has no armor. He takes 7 damage. Oh boy, the orc only has 10 strength, which means he didn't take 8 hits, so he's knocked down. He's not knocked down, but he took 5, which means his next attack is going to be at -2 dexterity from that. Boom. That's the end of the combat phase. Black J caused damage, did not take any, so he pushes the orc back. Again, this would have a lot more effect if there was stuff on the battle mat, but this is again a featureless Grey Plain, so that doesn't take precedence here. We go back now to initiative, and who gets the initiative for the next round? It's going to be the orc again. He is going to decide to take the initiative, so he is going to defend because he knows he's in trouble, so he's going to shift and defend. He's going to shift here and defend. Black J is going to shift, and attack. So, who goes first? Temporarily, the orc's dexterity is 12, which is still higher than Black J's 9, so the orc goes first. However, the orc is defending, so he doesn't roll anything. Black J is going to attack now, but he has to attack with 4 dice. 9 or less on 4 dice because the orc is defending. And he will 5, 9, 10, 11, 12. He will miss. This comes away. That pain comes away. And that is the end of that combat phase. There's no retreats or anything like that. Who goes first in the initiative? It's again going to be the orc. Well, the orc has his saber out now, and he's gritted his teeth through the pain. He's going to all-out attack, which isn't really anything. It just means a shift and attack is what he's doing. Black J as well is going to shift and attack, but the orc goes first. The orc does go first because he's got a dexterity of 14, so he strikes before Black J does. Does he hit him? Oh, well, it's not a critical hit, 3, 4, 5. It's an automatic hit. So regardless of what his dexterity is, he still hits. However, it's not a critical. It does normal damage, and a saber does 2d minus 2. Wow, 10 minus 2 is 8 against Black J's armor and shield of 4. So Black J actually takes 4 damage from this. Not enough to give him the -2 dexterity, but ooh, that's a hit. You see, the saber is far more effective than that tiny little short bow. A long bow would have been better, actually, but the orc wasn't strong enough to use a long bow. So that was the orc going first. Now Black J strikes back with his attack. Oh boy, 10, 11, 12, 13. That is going to miss, unfortunately. Now the orc has pushed Black J back and follows because he caused damage and did not take any. We go into a new round here. Black J is going to seize initiative. He is going to attack first. Shift and attack, over here. The orc is going to shift and attack as well, just to keep it simple. But the orc goes first. This is important. The orc is faster because he's got a faster dexterity. And he's rolling on 14s. And he rolls, oh, look at that, a 15, which is a miss. Oh, Black J got lucky. He strikes back on 9s or lesses. 13 is gonna miss. Okay, it's close here. Both are wounded. Who's going to go first? It's going to be Black J. He's going to shift an attack. So too is the orc. We don't actually have to roll for these general initiatives anymore because they're just locked in a 2-person hand-to-hand combat. There's no extraneous circumstances. So we're just going to go right to combat phases from now on, which means the orc's going to go first, okay? So the orc has decided to shift an attack, so he's rolling in 14s or lesses, and that's going to be 8. That is a hit. 2d minus 1 against Black J is 6. Minus 1 is 5. Black J has 4 points of armor, so Black J takes another hit. Ugh, but it's not enough to injure him. cause him pain. So Black Jay's rolling now with his strike on, oh God, 15. He completely misses. We go into the new round. Actually, he did cause damage, so the Orc pushes Black Jay that way. The Orc is gonna strike. Basically, it's just slugfest at this point. There's nothing else they're gonna do. The Orc's gonna strike on his 14, and Black Jay's gonna strike as well. Which means 15 is a miss. Black Jay gets to strike back with 9s. There we go. 5, 6 is a hit. His broadsword against the Orc is going to be 4. The Orc has no armor. He takes all 4 damage. He's already taken 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. He has a strength of 10. He expires and drops dead with that hit. Boom. And that is how basically melee combat works in the Fantasy Trip. It's very streamlined. It's very simple, but there's still options available to make anything interesting. Now, where this really does get interesting is when you have multiple foes on either side, because facing group attacks, trying to hit somebody from behind becomes really important. Also, obstacles, walls, cover, bodies to stumble over, stuff like this all becomes really interesting. So then you can actually go into advanced combat rules here in the Labyrinth, and this starts to get a little closer to GURPS level combat, where you've got way more options. But that's not what we did today. What we did today was just the melee combat component of the Fantasy Trip. So that's how that works. I like it. I'm not normally a proponent of 3d6 systems just because my brain has a hard time looking at 3 numbers and adding them up quickly. It's just a thing with me. It's just a thing. But other than that, I quite like it. There's things to keep track of, but not really a ton. You still have meaningful tactics. I really like the idea of whoever wins the initiative determines who moves first, who declares first, because that changes things up. I like the idea that attacks come in based on order of dexterity, which is kind of cool. I like the fact that armor protects you, but also slows you down and encumbers you a bit. So there is a trade-off there. It's good design. I like that. The idea that you can choose to defend or dodge, which just makes the attack harder to hit on a 46 roll instead of a 3d6 roll. I like that. It's simple, it's streamlined, but it allows you those meaningful tactical choices. Pretty cool. And once you internalize this, it moves really fast, much faster than GURPS can. If you turn up all the dials and switches on GURPS, it can be really, really as detailed as you want it to be. But the Fantasy Trip keeps things fairly light, fairly straightforward. This box set here is fantastic. It comes with all kinds of stuff. It comes with an area map of the world. It comes with a bunch of tokens. It comes with a bunch of these hex maps. It comes with all the books you need, all the components you need to play the game. It comes with an adventure, a couple of adventures actually, a couple of big long campaigns and stuff. This was released in 2019. This is the first printing of this box, but as I said, it's basically a reprint of all the stuff that the Fantasy Trip has done. Because again, this game's been around since I think 77, so it's been around a long, long time. Really pleased to get my hands on it. A big thanks to Steve Jackson Games for sending it to me and giving me the opportunity to showcase it here. Perhaps if you guys dug this, I will go into the wizard component at some point, and perhaps even I will take a couple characters through Death Test and see how that works. That might be a fun thing to do. Let me know if that's something you want to see in the comments below. Thanks for joining me here. Big thanks to my patrons and YouTube channel members as well. If you want to help support the channel, you can do so through the links listed below. Thanks for joining me here, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of the Featureless Grey Plain here on Me, Myself, and I.